Right, today we're going to be looking at this Volkswagen Turbo. It's off an AXD engine, the Transporter T5. I've actually already put a new turbo on the van, but this tutorial is going to be covering me removing the new turbo and putting it back on again because I didn't use this seal. I used the seal that came with the replacement turbo, which was very similar, but it only had one crush gasket on it. It didn't have this second gasket there. Put that on, torqued it up all officially, and it just leaks really badly. So this is actually the second time doing this job, so I know all the ins and outs of it, and yeah, I'll give those tips to you now. Be careful with this gasket because it has a plastic coating on it, so you don't want to lay it this way up and scratch it. We're going to pull it nice like that, keep the surface nice and clean. Let's take a look at some of the tools that we'll definitely be needing. You might be able to do this job with other tools, but this is the minimum that I'm going to use. Well, here's a few of the other parts we know we're going to need. Going to need a good sealer here for the exhaust system. This is some ultra high temperature stuff, so it should be fine for exhaust manifolds. You will need a exhaust manifold gasket, unless you can do this job without taking the exhaust manifold off. Because I've got an aftermarket one, I'm going to have to take it off to get the turbo out. If you can do it without taking the turbo out, go ahead and do that. We're also going to need a full set of gaskets, so I've got the turbo gasket to engine gasket, I've got the turbo to manifold gasket, and because it's an aftermarket exhaust manifold, it actually has a different gasket, which is one of these ceramic crush gaskets. I'm hoping this is the right one. I'll measure that up. It is about a 50.5mm inside diameter there, so hopefully that's the right one. You're going to need various extensions and elbows because some of these bolts are in some pretty difficult to get places. I've got some spare exhaust studs just in case I take a stud off. We'll need to put a new stud on. We're going to need a arrangement of Allen heads, 5 and 6mm definitely, but probably a full set, and you'll probably want some on the end of a socket drive as well. We've got a nice long bar here, because we're going to need to get some torque on some of these to undo them. The other thing I mentioned, of course, was the gaskets. I'm not going to use a new manifold gasket. I'm actually going to make one up out of this stuff, but in the manual it does recommend that, of course, you use the proper crush gasket. Don't reuse any of the gaskets because these are once-use gaskets only, and if you try and reuse them you will have leaks. The impact driver might be quite good for getting some of these bolts off a bit quicker, but not much good for putting them back on. You'll need a proper torque wrench. With a good setup. The other thing I'd recommend you have is one of these clip removers. These are for those kind of sprung hose clips, and what you do is you hook it over the end of those and then you can clamp down on them to take them off. There is one down the bottom of the turbo end which might be difficult to get to. You can try with long nose pliers, but they're a pain. These are the right thing to do the job. Not the most expensive ones, but they work. The other thing that's very important is a source of information. So I work from this Haynes manual here, the workshop manual, and it has all the torque settings for the various nuts and bolts that are going on and off, and I do always torque them up exactly how they're meant to be. And apart from all that, you want a full socket set with long reach. You're going to want some pliers, some Allen keys, you're going to need some screwdrivers, you're going to need spanners, you're going to need a pretty in-depth toolkit. These are probably some of the more important things you'll need. Is these not necessarily torques, I think those are torques, but you also get ones that are called multi-point splines and stuff like that, and you'll need an arrangement of those. Off the top of my head, I don't know if you'll need them particularly for this job. I think the old bolts that came off the original turbo might have been these multi-point splines, but we'll get on with the job. We'll see what we need and add that to that list that you've already seen. So wish us luck. If you haven't got much clearance under there, or you're got your van lowered, you're going to have to jack it up and put it on axle stands really. And actually, if you can lift it up or work in a pit, that would be really, really good, but I haven't got that option here. It's a tight squeeze under there, and it can be difficult to get to the turbo bolts. We're also going to have to remove quite a bit of the auxiliaries from the top here to give us a bit of clearance to work down here, because we'll have to release the turbo from the exhaust manifold. Because I've got an aftermarket exhaust manifold, that has to come off as well, because it just doesn't fit otherwise. The
The exhaust manifold can come out from the top, but I think you'd have to remove or squeeze it around these pipes over here. So it's actually easier to get someone under the van and lower it down to them. The other thing we're going to have to take off that you can't really see from here is the rear engine mount and the exhaust pipe. So we're going to remove the down pipe, we're going to take that away from the mid box, take out the rear engine mount. That'll give us a good amount of clearance down there. You can try and work around it if you want, but it's just really not worth it. The amount of time it's going to take you to work around it, you might as well just take that stuff off and it will make it easier.
Alright, so we're now under the van looking up towards the engine bay. You can see this is obviously the exhaust pipe. And there's the mid box. What we're going to undo is undo those clamps there, or that bracket. Hopefully it'll undo easily. If not, you're going to have to take an angle grinder to it and replace it. We'll undo that. We're going to undo 2 bolts on this bracket here that will release that. And what we don't want to do is end up hanging it from the turbo, so we'll probably want to loosen up the turbo as well. Now up the end of that flexi, you can see this is obviously the catch. There's your flexi hose, and then there's kind of an elbow, and the elbow connects to the turbo. There's a C-clamp on that, or like a clamp like this with a bolt in it that does it up and... Okay, so the bolt is loose now, and it actually just kind of levers up like that. And then you'll need something just to pry it open with. They can be stuck on there, so you may actually need to get a screwdriver in here, or a chisel or something that you can lever the 2 halves of this clamp apart.
This is the clamp, it's in 3 segments. You only have to undo this bolt partially, and then you can actually pry it out from there. What you'll actually find is it's quite a tight fit, and it will be stuck on the exhaust and the turbo, and you'll actually have to try and get a screwdriver in here or a screwdriver in there and knock it off. Luckily this hasn't been on for very long, so it came off quite easily. They are also a bugger to get back on, because you actually have to bring the exhaust pipe together, the down pipe into the turbo, and then you need to hook this around both of them at the same time. What you'll find is it will catch one and not the other, and you'll end up having it maybe seated on both around here, and then it's actually skipped out here. And it's definitely a 2-person job. Someone underneath to hold the exhaust pipe in place, someone from the top to try and get this around it, and the person from underneath can then say whether or not they can see that it's got around both parts of the exhaust and the turbo. Removing the air box here, we're going to have to take this connector off, so just push it on, squeeze the tab, it should lift off. That's the MAF, or the mass airflow sensor. You may have a clip here. If you have a clip, you're going to have to use a compression tool, maybe one of these. I've actually got a Jubilee clip, so I can just unscrew that. There's a clip on the front and the back. Lift them up and then bring this out. So that's the sensor in the top of the air box. We're also going to take out the air filter, because I'm going to take the bottom half of the air box out as well. Your air box might clip in onto a rubber clip. It might be quite difficult to pull it off, but you should be able to ease it out. On the front is a bolt. You'll have to either undo that. Mine's only finger tight actually. There's also a pipe in the front of the box which should just unclip, and then the air box should just lift. There we go. I'll lose that Jubilee clip. Next thing, we're going to take our compression tool. We're going to hook it over the inlet to the compressor spring clip and pull that pipe off. There's another vacuum tube in it that should just pull out quite easily. Like so. Now that pipe works out the way, you can actually see the inlet to the turbo. There is a connector or a flange on here that's held on with some Allen head bolts. I think it's a 5 or a 6. You can actually get in there, unscrew that and take this inlet off here, and that'll actually allow you to get into the turbo and the spindle, and you can actually kind of inspect it from here, just on the air side. So that's your input flange off there. You don't necessarily have to take this off, but it does make working on the turbo a little easier. And you can actually get in there and feel whether the turbo spins freely now. It actually spins really nicely. It's brand new, but there's a lot of oil in there. So yeah, that spins quite nicely. Now we'll take off this boost hose that goes over the top of the engine. So these things just pull those clips off. Using a pick. Pull off your air line. There's a lot of oil in here. Now, I'm not expecting there to be that much oil because I've just put a brand new turbo on there. So I don't really know where the oil's coming from. Strange. This next pipe also just unclips in a similar fashion. Next we want to remove this clamp that holds the EGR pipe to the manifold. Don't actually have to undo it completely, but I've taken it off so you can get a better view of it here. We then need to take off two 15mm heads. No, they're not 15s, they're 14s. From the other end of the pipe. There is a gasket. Try not to lose it. And that's a new pipe that's been put on very recently as well. Now we start to get a better view of the manifold. Looking down at the manifold from here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. That holds your manifold to your turbo. From underneath the van, you're going to need to get to 3 bolts that hold the turbo to the block. That's rather more difficult, and we'll be taking a look at that in a moment. First of all, let's get those screws out of there. A long bar and a 6mm Allen key makes the job easy. There's something else that makes the job even easier. Now we go fishing. Oh, I think I dropped it. No, there we go. All 4 bolts in one go. If we follow this vacuum pipe down to underneath the turbo, it might be clipped to the turbo. We should be able to grab hold of the rubber hose and yank it off. That's the actuator hose, so we'll need to keep that one safe out of the way. Now technically the turbo is released from the manifold, and if you've got an original manifold you might be able to get it out without taking the manifold off, but we're actually going to have to get the manifold off. Now our attention will turn to getting the turbo off from underneath. Now it's time to get comfy. Got a nice little pillow there, little soft mat to lie on, little towel if I decide to have a shower or anything. So yeah, it's really about been happy under here because it's a bit tight, and as I say, jacking the vehicle up would give you much more space, but then it can be very difficult to actually reach the turbo. The best way to reach it would be to actually stand up under the vehicle or remove the subframe completely and drop the engine. Actually, there is plenty of room up there, but it is a proper bugger to do. So yeah, get comfy, make sure you can fit. Now, as I come under here, there's some bolts there holding the catalytic converter on. You can get away with just undoing 2 of those bolts, undoing this clamp and undoing the clamp from the back of the turbo, which is quite difficult to get to. I have to get right under there, make sure I've got the tools, and that whole section will come out. That gives you quite a bit of space up the middle here. The next thing is this rear mount. There's one bolt on the top of it that attaches an arm to a rubber shock absorber that then comes down into this like A-frame that the anti-roll and the torsion bars go through, and it's like hooked over the top of the steering rack. 4 bolts on the bottom of them should get them out, but you're going to need a long reach Allen key or spline tool to get at those, and all of that out of there will make working on this turbo as easy as possible, which you can see just in this corner on the right there. So without removing that, you could try and get to the bolts. If you can undo the bolts, all the rest can happen from the top, but I can't get to the bolts. Right, let's do this. Well, this is cozy. I've got quite a few of the bits I think I'm going to need, like my long socket here for anything that's my long ratchet here in case there's anything that's quite difficult to get off. I've got an arrangement of really long bars, they'll probably roll away. I've actually got the socket here for removing the turbo. It's an M12 CRV. These kind of multi-point stars, I'm not going to count them now, maybe they're called a spline. I've got that. I don't think I'm going to get that far in one go, but just in case we do. Right, some of this I'm going to do on my stomach, some of it's going to be lay on my back. So I'm going to remove this bolt from here. I'm not sure what it is. That's the right one, first time, look at that. Wow, luck's on my side. I'm not going to be able to do this holding the camera, so join me in a minute. That came out relatively easy. It was a 16mm, quite long. It's got a washer on it, so it's going to take some time to get at it. Can't get a torque wrench on that. The next ones I'm going to do, well, there's 4. There's 4 up there. Don't know where you can see them. I'll try and arrow them out, but that's roughly where they are. I think they're 16 or 17s, and I'm going to try and get them with an extension. But even if I get all 4 of them out, you can squeeze it past this, but I'm not going to squeeze it past because I want some more space. So I'm going to take that out and undo these ones underneath. And these ones here, I think originally they were multi-point spline, but I've actually replaced them with some hex heads just because it's easier to get a hex socket in there for me. So you'll either need some splines or Allen or a hex head. So let's get that off. I'm going to have to say goodbye again. So now that's unbolted, we should be able to drop that one down. Lift this one down, the vibration dampener, and the vibration dampener arm. The only reason to take them out is to gain access. Actually, if I'd removed the front end exhaust pipe first, that would have probably made things a bit easier, but I think it's a bit fiddly either way. But I'm now going to take all the exhaust system off as well. We can now undo the exhaust clamp bolts. These can also be a pain to get off, so worst case scenarios, you might have to take an angle grinder to it and cut it off and replace it with a new one. So if you're going to do the job, you might want to have a look at it and see if you can undo it before you start taking the turbo off, and buy one if you need it. Now, that should slide back if it's not seized too badly. Might slide either way actually. It's quite badly seized, so probably have to end up getting a hammer on it and knocking it, or putting some penetrating oil on there, but we'll get that off in a bit. No need to worry. Before we get that off, we're probably going to want to do these retaining bolts here. Oh, that's quite tight. Before we undo these completely, we're going to want to remove the exhaust from the turbo, because we definitely don't want the weight of the exhaust pulling on the turbo. That would be very bad, so don't do that. Now that the turbo and the exhaust pipe are separated, we can go ahead and try and pull this exhaust pipe out, which hopefully won't be too much bother. But be careful of the flexi pipe up the top there, you don't want to damage or rip that. This is an expensive part as it has a catalytic converter in there as well. There it is. Right, with all the exhaust pipe removed and the engine mount at the back there, we've got pretty good access to the turbo really. We've got 3 bolts. Let's see if we can get a better shot. Got the 3 bolts here on the bottom of the turbo. Unfortunately, there's not quite enough space, I don't think. Maybe there is really to get a torque wrench on there, because they need to be torqued up to 40 Newton meters. We're going to have to use my spline tool here, which is an M12 CRV. And yeah, got to get up there now and try and undo those. Well guys, that's pretty much it. We've got the turbo out. I actually managed just to get the spline on a long socket up into that gap to undo those 3, so that made that nice and easy. It does feel quite firm in there, but I managed to wiggle it out to the side and drop it out the back over the top of the steering rack and then onto my stomach and then down beside me. So that worked out pretty well. Technically, probably don't need to take the manifold off the back now, but I think I've got a bit of a blow on there, so I'm going to take the manifold off now. Right, to get the manifold off, we've now got the turbo off, which makes it easier, and if you haven't got the turbo off, you'll need to watch part 1 of this video. We're going to undo the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it's 10 bolts that hold it on. The ones up this side where the airbox usually is are actually the most difficult ones to get to. There's one here and one underneath, and this metal pipe gets in the way as you start trying to get the manifold out. But don't necessarily try and pull that pipe out. It is just press fitted in there. There's a bracket up the other end. You undo the bracket at the other end, just a screw, and you can just wiggle this enough to get just enough clearance to pull that one out if you need to. I think mine comes out with the stud, so I'm just going to get in there, undo all those, and then we should be good to take it out. A couple of tips for the studs is don't pull them all the way out straight away. You should really do it in a balanced way in case there's any warpage to this. You don't want to end up snapping one of the studs with it taking too much force. The other thing to note is if they don't feel like they're going to move straight away, squirt a bit of penetrating oil on there. Even WD-40 might help a little, and just come back to them in 10-20 minutes. If they still don't budge, do any others up around it again, a bit more penetrating oil around there, and just wait another half an hour or an hour or 2 hours, because the last thing you want to do is actually snap one of those off. If you do snap them off, it's going to be a massive pain, and I can't help you with that. You're going to have to get a drill in here, you're going to have to drill them out, put an extractor in there, pull them out, and worst case scenario is if you miss drilling into the screw and you end up drilling into the block, you could literally drill in, cause an oil leak, destroy the engine really. The engine would definitely have to come out at that stage. So everything you do at this stage, you want to try and not break these off. And sometimes penetrating oil will work better after 24 hours or even longer, so just wait and come back and see if you can get them off again. Wish me luck. Bear in mind there's a 12mm bolt and a kind of a brass or copper type spacer. They're both very important, so make sure you don't lose them. If you do lose one of these bolts don't actually go far up enough the studs, I believe, to actually clamp down on the manifold. And again, if these are damaged or squished, you'll have to get new ones.